So this is a perfect topic for me because before I joined the foundation, I was a journalist. So framing the problem is is something which is familiar to me. Julie, I think we'll start with you, and I'm thrilled that you're here. So you see the real toll of these stats in your job because your team advises tenants who are in stress or at risk of losing their tenancies. Can you briefly explain what RentRight does and where you see the biggest gaps in the system?
Yep, certainly. So RentRight SA is a statewide service, so we're funded now by 3 different government agencies across the whole state of South Australia. So we're predominantly a call centre platform for all of South Australian renters across every housing platform to give advice, information, guidance, referrals, whatever we can do to help the South Australian renters that are finding themselves in trouble or in need or just needing general information. Aside from that, we do a variety of different parts of our program. We have a financial counselling service. More recently, SYC became a financial counselling agency last year. So that's handy given the amount of debt and other rental stress that our South Australian renters find themselves in. And we also have support for tenants that are being taken to the tribunal, so we have an outreach service there. So we have seen a significant increase in our figures, and especially more related to private rental. So private rental is over 80% of our work in South Australia. The gaps, well, it's definitely labelled correctly, David. The missing middle is the key here. We have some fabulous staff on deck that are actually living the experience themselves right now. We've got some staff that are currently looking for rentals and fit in the median income bracket, if you like, that are not able to get into the rental market right now. So I mainly wanted to point out that youth is our biggest gap that we are experiencing. Young people that are even two-person household earning decent income. And I provided a quote to David, and I won't read out, but the crux of that story is that they're 2 full-time workers with a medium income level that are not eligible for the low income initiatives, and they're certainly not eligible for the first home buyers because they don't have the 2% that the bank want, or the can't afford the 2.5% to 3% stamp duty, and all of the other things that come along with it. So finding a rental, Adelaide is looking at an average now of $580 a week across the state, and even more so in some of the suburbs. So the gaps for us are the youth. They have been completely pushed out of the market. One of our funding contracts is to assist young people 17 to 25 years of age to get into the rental market. We can't meet that KPI at all now, and haven't been able to for the last 2 to 4 years. So the youth is one of the biggest gaps that need most of the support. And what I've heard in lots of rental forums and network groups that I'm involved in is that even with the social housing, the South Australian Housing Trust and community housing providers are doing their absolute best, but to house someone that's only on a low income or a youth allowance, the asset itself is costing them way more than they're even getting back in rent. And then in addition to that, you've got supports for young people that haven't lived independently before, so they need independent living skills, and those skills are not funded by any services. There are some, yes, of course, but there's not enough. So dare I be bold and say, is there any more funding out there for community housing organisations to be subsidised, or support services to be provided?
Because you actually mentioned to me in your notes that you're actually having less referrals from young people because they're just simply exited they're not there. They're living at home or...
That's right.
Yeah.
Families are now, having their young people stay at home till 30 or 40 years of age.
And the bit in that quote that made me quite sad was about they're looking at staying in their current situation for at least 2 years with no fun or luxury, only work and earning money. We're in a place where we don't think we'd be able to live independently and experience that part of adulthood outside of our family homes. Jennifer, you experienced the pointiest aspect of the rental system, I'll call it a system, but the emergency housing. And could you explain how that experience led you to form your organisation?
Yeah. So, when I was in my 20s, I experienced domestic violence and I had to flee with my children to a shelter. But I also had 2 dogs that were 8 years old at the time, and I had them both since they were puppies. And so these dogs were everything to me. They were like my best friends, and they ended up being my kids' first best friends as well. And I couldn't take my dogs to the shelter, and so that delayed me leaving this domestic violence relationship. And then when I did finally, I had to leave because it became that severe. I tried sort of paying rent at the shelter and at the place that I left for a period of time to try and keep hold of my dogs, and I could only do that for so long as well. And my dogs ended up at the pound and sadly euthanized. And I guess like when I eventually, there was like a whole heap of stuff in between. Like I lived in unsafe environments even after the DV shelter, just because there wasn't enough, I guess, social supports. And so I was like couch surfing and doing all sorts. And then I ended up in community housing, and which was thankfully pet friendly. And I felt stable enough to actually just offer myself to Southern Domestic Violence at the time. And I just said, if anyone is experiencing basically what I did and has pets, you can phone me up and I can foster their pets. And I sort of thought that was going to be like a bit of just a low-key thing. But I didn't realise that there was a huge gap where so many women delay leaving domestic violence situations because of their pets. And like just literally the week after I offered myself, I started getting phone calls and I was like, what is going on? But then 10 years, the charity's now around 10 years old, and we offer a whole heap of stuff. We deliver a whole suite of social services. And I guess when you think about it, there's around 67% of Australians own a pet. So if you think about people that are in a rental crisis, a DV crisis, mental health crisis, anything related to housing, there's 67% of Australians own a pet. So it's almost like a majority of people that are going to go through a crisis also own a pet. And I think it's so important to include pets in housing policies and things, because pets are so important to community connection and recovery and people's mental health and well-being. Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Kate, what does the data tell us about mental health and renting? Is that something that's been on your horizon?
Yeah. There is a really strong correlation between a lack of housing stability and poor mental health outcomes, and just a million studies that have shown that. So I think that's a really significant component, is not being able to plan for the future. Makes you feel unstable. It makes you feel like you can't put the right mechanisms in place to look after your kids, to look after your own situation. So that's very much a connection. There's also pretty strong correlation between inadequate housing and poor physical health outcomes, and particularly in cold places like Adelaide and Melbourne, a really strong correlation between houses that are too cold and respiratory issues, heart issues, lots of things like that. So there is a really big public health implication of a poorly resourced rental sector.
And given the frightening statistics you provided us before, and I'm thinking too about the minister's speech about the long pipeline for supply. What can we do in the short term to begin to address this issue at scale? Is there anything we can do from your perspective?
That's hard because it's a long burning issue and doing things immediately is really hard. I will take your point though about the issue with housing young people. And one thing that Queensland has recently done, and potentially other states are doing, is the Queensland government has come in with a youth subsidy that they're providing to community housing providers to encourage them to house young people, to make that gap between what youth allowance pays a young person and what job seeker or a pension or something like that would pay, because there is a lot of incentives to house someone on a pension over a young person just because their capacity to pay rent is so much higher. So I think one thing you could do immediately at a large scale is look at how housing intersects with support payments from a federal government or a state government perspective. All the other things, like we do need more supply, we need to build more, we need more social housing, those are all really, really important, but they're not instant. So yeah, that's probably where I'd be pointing my attention for an immediate fix.
Yeah, and Julie, thinking again about the scary statistics, the disappearing green, I guess that raises the stakes for people, particularly in public housing, who are facing eviction. What do you see the key issues there, and what kind of supports are there for those people besides you?
Very good questions, David. Well, the issues and problems, I think I prefer to focus on solutions. So my solution, our program's solution, is to look at more early intervention support services to prevent those in social housing from falling out of social housing. So we are the statewide service that supports tenants that are struggling, and as a result of those struggles they are falling out of the social housing sector and absolutely can't get back in or can't get into the rental market, the private market. So early intervention and education is where our focus has been. There is very, very little support services in those areas that Kate's mentioned around public health. Our program deals a lot with things like property condition, so hoarding and squalor. It's a diagnostic mental health condition, antisocial behaviour, all of those things that are related to low income or below the poverty line support payments. So I agree 100% with Kate's stats and support solutions around increasing those payments, but also more funding on programs that can provide that intervention when things are going wrong, rather than wait till it gets crisis point and they contact us for support to not be evicted.
That's something you've had experience with, Jennifer, with people you work with, isn't it?
Yeah, so it definitely can be a long game, but we've definitely had. We're not funded for this. We've just so we can't do it mainstream as such. But some of the clients that we have worked with over time, and we've provided like a more like holistic wraparound support. I've literally seen people go from rock bottom to now like studying, keeping their housing, have a license, and they're being productive members of the community again. And that has all been like they'll like. I guess it's just putting wraparound supports around people. You need a village. Basically, when they say like a child needs a village, like everybody needs a village, and you need more than just family support. You need that community and connection and all sorts of things. And I've seen firsthand the benefits of when you step in and actually give someone a holistic, like non-judgmental wraparound supports and what it does to people.
Okay. Forgive me if I've misinterpreted the graphs that were up briefly, but the red line at the top seemed to be dipping downwards. Does that indicate that the rental market itself might be might be starting to come off the boil because people simply can't, even though availability is low, people just simply can't afford to be there. So those rents have to come down.
Yes, probably. I am not going to look at my crystal ball and make assumptions. I haven't looked at the data around that, but I think that's a pretty fair interpretation of that graph. That if we're seeing, because I had another graph and then I took it out because I had to stop myself with too many graphs. Yeah. I'm just going to like push down the academic in me sometimes. But I also had a graph that was looking at what percentage of rental price increases were over 10% and how that was changing over time. And there was this big old jump in the amount of rent increases, the proportion of rent increases, and at the same time a big jump in the proportion that were high, like really significant. And both of those trends are coming down now. There are less rental prices increasing between tenancies, and they're also increasing by less. So I would assume, yes, that rental prices might be starting to flatten. It's a great thing.
I'd like to allow plenty of time for questions. I think we have a microphone out there somewhere. Nadi, do we have another microphone out there? Yeah. In a minute. But I know, Kate, one of the cohorts you've studied is older women. It seems to me as though we started thinking about this as the missing middle and the hole in the donut, but it is all hole and no donut to some degree. Can you talk about some of those other demographics that are really suffering?
Yeah. Is it all hole and no donut? I like that framing. I think that older women, we hear the statistic all the time that women over 55 are the fastest growing cohort of people experiencing homelessness. That was true. It's changing now. But the reason why older women increasing so much was such a big statistical outcome is because it was raising from a small base. So we absolutely do need to be worried about older women, but actually if you look at the service users of homelessness provision, it's women 25 to 45, usually with kids, usually escaping family violence. So putting it all in context, yes, older women is a problem, but it is all whole and there's gaps all across the system. I think older women who don't own their own homes in retirement or have lost access to their homes through divorce or illness or whatever it might be is a huge canary in the coal mine. And we should be worried about that. And also women before they hit 65 and before they've qualified for the pension, because job seeker is so much lower than the pension, that there's this really vulnerable time where you're maybe 50 experiencing ageism in the workplace, you lose your job, you're on job seeker, and then you're still waiting to kind of qualify. I'm not saying that the age pension is this sudden cash cow, it's totally not, but it's part of a pattern that happens across a woman's life cycle.
Yeah, I guess, Julie, that raises another question in my mind about how with a system this under pressure, in the past, relatively normal life crises, there's some buffer there. But this system, it seems like if something goes wrong for you, you could be in trouble in terms of your housing very quickly. Is that something you've observed?
Oh, absolutely. 2 to 3 years ago, my colleague and I worked together in the lived experience framework to look at that particular age cohort, because that's exactly what was happening back in that time, where we developed a renting well guide, because women around that 55 to 65 age bracket falling out of their home ownership and into housing market, they had no idea of how to look for a rental, facing all the changes in digital rental applications and the other aspects. So we got together with Office for Ageing Well and got some funding there. So that was a big spike about 2 to 3 years ago. So you're spot on, Kate. It was quite an alarming number of people accessing our service, looking for ways of getting into the rental market, and our program at that time wasn't even looking at that age cohort.
Is it? It occurs to me that that could be a lot of your work too. Is it just going through those bureaucratic processes, lodging appeals and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our focus was on, how did they fall out? How can we keep them in it, especially if they were in a rental housing situation. Home ownership was a little bit harder to work with, but we definitely designed this program in conjunction with the Office for Ageing to support them outside of our contractual requirements, just by doing face-to-face outreach appointments and things like that to support them. We reached out with the Office for Ageing. That was...
Thank you. Well, we can have some questions now. Nadi's got a couple of microphones at the back. I'm guessing that a lot of this isn't news to lots of you in the room, but at the foundation, and I have to thank the Wyatt Trust for their help with this since I've been there since last year. We're very keen to elevate voices of lived experience to the policy level, and the Economic Media Centre in Melbourne have been really helpful with that as well. It's how I got connected with Jennifer. They do really good work in training people up to talk to the media and in forums like this. Any questions? No questions. Yes.
Do I need a microphone, or can I just ask loudly?
Go for it.
Okay. Got a question for that relates to one of Kate's slides. Kate, you had a slide with a couple of thematic maps that showed rental affordability around metropolitan Adelaide. And if people picked up, there's actually this ring around the city which seems more affordable than some of the outer areas, which my understanding is that relates to housing diversity. Mm-hmm. That in some of these inner ring suburbs you get groups of units with, one or two bedrooms that are actually more affordable to rent than the further you go out as traditional housing. So what can we do to actually improve our diversity of housing supply in outer areas, if that is actually one of the reasons that rents are less affordable in more traditional areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I don't know the geography of Adelaide very well, so I take your point. I think you're right, but I'm not sure. I did do some work a couple of years ago looking at Melbourne about the concept of naturally occurring affordable housing that isn't social housing or subsidised housing. And what we found in Melbourne is that there's this incredibly important resource of 60s and 70s walk-up apartments that were built with a lower income household in mind and have retained their affordability throughout the decades in really good locations. So I think that's probably part of it. But then new build, medium density, kind of apartment blocks also very, very important. So I imagine you're right that that's what it is. It's that increasing density. And being able to increase density in outer suburbs is going to be really positive as well. I don't know what the planning codes in Adelaide are doing at the moment around that, but I did like the comment on ancillary dwellings earlier today. And I know in Sydney there's been a huge amount, relatively, of affordable rental housing delivered through ancillary dwellings. So I would question the comment that was made that it's a really small part of the puzzle. I think it could be another part of that kind of picture. But I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that.
Any other questions? I've got another one for... actually, yes?
I guess just I have a question that relates to numbers. And we talk about social housing, 25% of the income is the rent. We talk about, generally speaking, affordable housing offers that have been out in the market, over the last couple of decades, that were generally in that kind of 80% discount of the market rent, maybe 75% in the case of CHPs, so they can manage their tax issues. And then we talk about 30% being a measure of affordability, how much you should pay towards your housing. I guess I just wanted to pick your brain about that gap between 25% 25% of income and 75% discount. You talked about 580 being median rent. Is that right? So, you know, you take your 75 or your 80% of your 580, you're still at 450 a week rent. That's still a big jump compared to 25% of income. And I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts on that gap and models, ideas, thoughts about how we bridge that gap. And then I guess the next question for the rest of the room is how you make that work for people who are actually providing that housing.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a huge issue. And a 25% market rate discount is still not affordable to most people that we're talking about in this very low and moderate income bracket. What does it do? It encourages us to deliver housing for moderate income households who do benefit from it but are not where the need is. And this is why I say the focus on affordable housing is deeply concerning to me, because we're ticking boxes saying we're doing affordable housing, but is it actually targeted at where the need is greatest? Probably not. So yeah, totally concerning. The only thing that gives me some hope, well, many things give me some hope, but there potentially is an argument for, if we're doing affordable housing and it's delivered by CHPs, is that cross-subsidising and creating the balance sheets that allow them to do more of that deeply subsidised housing. I think there's some argument there, but totally agree that it's a concern.
Anyone else? I've got another question for you, Jennifer. So apart from pets, which, you know, it's a real, I think we can all understand how difficult that would be. Are there other services, gaps that you see with people in crisis that would be useful for other services to provide?
I guess, like, for me, like a lot of our clients do, I guess a lot of the clients that we see are falling through the gaps, and a lot of it is just some of the practical support. Like, people struggle with filling out paperwork, they struggle with even just like getting to places as well. Like, we were supporting a woman that was in emergency motel accommodation, and she did have her dogs with her, but she had to go to housing appointments and things like that, but she couldn't manage it all the time. So we just organised a volunteer to help her get to all these appointments. But I think there's a lot of people are made to jump through, jump through a lot of hoops, I guess, in some sense, to meet all this criteria for emergency accommodation and stuff. But they really, really struggle with like actually just doing it, like getting it done. And I guess we can't underestimate when people are going through something like that, like what effects it has on their mental health and just being able to function. And but then on the flip side as well, like I'll talk about my sister, for instance, at the moment, and she's just going through a divorce and she's got 2 young children and she's in a rental in McLaren Vale, but she's not going to be able to afford that for too much longer. And she is working like sort of part-time and managing her kids as well. And then both of them are not school age yet. But it's like, and like you were saying about early intervention and prevention and stuff, like for someone like her, she's like feeling really embarrassed and like a failure and stuff. And it's like, she doesn't want to end up in the system, but how does she prevent herself from ending up in that system, and where's the supports? And like, I didn't really, I don't know if I can connect her with you guys, but yeah, it's sort of, I guess it's that early intervention stuff as well, I think, before it gets too bad. And the difference between intergenerational poverty and poverty, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm assuming everyone does know the difference, but people that sort of are just experiencing like situational poverty, like they usually remain hopeful and know that they're going to get themselves out of trouble. But the people that are experiencing intergenerational poverty, they've got no hope. They don't have hope, and I guess it's just trying to instill that hope again. And they don't have any life skills either. Most people in intergenerational poverty left at a very early age, and they don't know how to help themselves. They don't have life skills to keep a tenancy or to sort of get themselves in front, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I've been thinking about this week is about stigma, particularly around public housing, because, you know, that it's a regular breakout in the media about, deadbeat housing tenants. I wondered whether that would change because the problem with unaffordable housing is so wide that in a sense we're all in it together. But does anyone have any reflections on that from an advocacy perspective? I guess because those people do come to sort of tabloid media attention from time to time.
Personally, I'm not a fan of cluster housing, if that's the word for it, whereas you put so many people that are in the same circumstances together, especially if there is substance abuse and stuff, like if someone's trying to get themselves out of that cycle and they're just in it, it's really hard. But I do understand that like affordability, and I guess like when you think of like building housing complexes and stuff, like it sort of is affordable to build apartments and things. But I think that I think you had like a while ago, there was a really good speaker at a Dunstan conference, I think in about 2018. Her name was Dr. Maria Curtis. And she said that that housing needs to be a bundle of goodies. I think she said something like that. I've actually got her quote written down, but if you look her up, she's it was just saying that basically that shelter needs to be more than a shelter, I guess. It needs to be a bundle of goodies, and that includes like social and education and like all the stuff that needs to go into a community. And I think that's where we're lacking as well, is just community connection, like just back to basics, like that people need connection. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for your contributions. It was great to have you all as part of this, and I look forward to what's the rest of today is going to be looking at, which includes innovations and ideas. But I think it was important to go through this, and it was really valuable to me. Thank you.